On the 8th of January 2005, cave diver David Shaw entered the water at Bushman's Hole, one of the deepest submerged freshwater caves in the world. He had dived there before in order to break a cave diving depth record, but on this day he was returning to the murky blue waters with another goal in mind. He was there to retrieve the long-lost body of a fellow diver. Though David would ultimately succeed in his mission, the retrieval would come at a terrible cost. Bushman's Hole, also known as Bushman's Hut, is situated on the land of the Mount Carmel Game Farm in the Northern Cape Province of South Africa. As you approach the natural sinkhole from above, it looks like little more than a modest natural pool in the middle of a rocky crater. But it is, in fact, a submerged cave that stretches down to a depth of about 280 meters, or 919 feet. This makes it one of the deepest accessible submerged caves in the world. This unique site has, over the years, proved attractive to cave divers who wish to push themselves and test the limits of what is possible in their sport. The record for the deepest ever dive was set at Bushman's Hole in 1996, when diver Nuno Gomes travelled down to the deepest part of the cave in a marathon dive that lasted more than 12 hours. There's a good reason why this and all other deep dives at Bushman's Hole take so long. When diving to great depths, the bodies of divers are subjected to huge amounts of pressure from the water around them. To prevent their lungs from collapsing under this pressure, divers must breathe air that is at a higher pressure than normal. At such high pressures, the various gases that make up this air can dissolve into the blood. In the case of nitrogen, this gas is not metabolized by the human body, and so will re-emerge from the blood as the diver ascends and the pressure drops. If a diver ascends too quickly, the re-emerging nitrogen will form bubbles throughout the body. As well as being extremely painful, these bubbles can cause a range of serious health problems, affecting the brain, spine, heart, and vital organs. The range of symptoms caused by ascending too rapidly is known as decompression sickness, or the bends. The latter name arises from the fact that the condition often makes those who suffer it bend or hunch over in pain. With a dive as deep as Bushman's Hole, divers must stop for many long rests on their way to the surface to let excess nitrogen dissipate slowly. The deeper they go and the longer they spend down there, the longer they may have to wait on the way back up. Spending just 3 or 4 minutes at the lowest point of Bushman's Hole could require an ascent lasting as long as 12 hours. Further to this, excess nitrogen can also cause a condition known as nitrogen narcosis, the main symptom of which is decreased mental function. As divers go deeper, the pressure increases. The solubility of nitrogen increases. The amount of excess nitrogen in their body increases, and their ability to think clearly and logically decreases. Some divers describe nitrogen narcosis as feeling similar to having several alcoholic drinks on an empty stomach. In a cave diving context where concentration and focus are vital, nitrogen narcosis can be deadly. On the 17th of December 1994, Dion Dreyer entered the water at Bushman's Hole to help support a dive by the South Africa Cave Diving Association. At just 20 years old, Dion was an adventurous young man with hobbies that included hunting, racing cars, and motorcycling. He was also an avid diver and had racked up more than 200 dives over the last few years. This dive, however, would be his last. During a routine ascent, Dion lost consciousness, possibly as a result of exertion and heavy breathing at depth. It happened extremely quickly. A fellow diver later recalled looking back and getting a thumbs up from Dion just 30 seconds before he fell unconscious, drifted down towards the bottom of the cave, and was lost. It was recognized very quickly that there was no chance of rescuing Dion alive, although an attempt was made to locate his body using a remote-control submersible robot. This was unsuccessful, and Dion's family resigned themselves to the idea that Bushman's Hole would be Dion's final resting place. A plaque was mounted there as a memorial to the intrepid young diver. It wasn't until years later, on the 28th of October 2004, that Dion's body was discovered by another diver, David Shaw was an airline pilot with Cathay Pacific and spent much of his spare time engaging in technical and recreational diving. During this particular dive, he not only broke several diving records, but also stumbled across Dion's body lying at the bottom of Bushman's hole, partially stuck in silt and mud. David made some brief attempts to free Dion's body, but was unsuccessful, and had no time to take further action. He attached a line to the body to make it easier to locate again in the future, returned slowly to the surface, and told his fellow divers what he had found. Soon after discovering Dion's body, David made the decision to go back for another dive and attempt a retrieval. In doing so, he would be able to provide comfort to Dion's family, as they would be able to lay Dion to rest in a place of their choosing. As the person who had most recently reached the deepest depths of Bushman's hole, and also having completed more than 300 dives over a 5-year span, he believed that he was well placed to retrieve Dion's remains. Over the next few months, David and several of his peers coordinated a massive operation, including huge amounts of compressed gas and other equipment, the cooperation of the South African police, and the creation of a specially designed silk body bag. Plans were made to cover various emergencies, and David took part in several practice dives at Bushman's hole. On the day of the dive, Dion's family were present at the site, but deliberately arrived late, after David had entered the water, so that their presence would not put extra pressure on him to succeed. The first part of the dive went smoothly. David descended to the bottom of Bushman's hole, located Dion's body, and began freeing him from the silty floor of the cave. To his surprise, when he successfully did so, Dion's body began to float. This was unexpected. After so long in the water, the remains should have been little more than bones, but it appeared Dion's diving gear had partially preserved some of his tissues, meaning that his body was more buoyant than expected. Because of this unexpected buoyancy, David struggled to get Dion's body into the body bag. For several minutes he wrestled with the body, his breathing getting heavier and heavier with the exertion. He had only a few minutes to complete his task, but it only got more difficult the more he tried. As he worked, he briefly entangled the body bag and the lines securing his equipment, and had to spend more time and effort freeing them, his breathing getting heavier and heavier as he struggled. At this point in time, David could potentially have abandoned the attempt to get Dion's remains into the bag. He did not do so. The effects of nitrogen narcosis, exacerbated by his heavy breathing, made it almost impossible for him to think clearly, or to deviate from the plan he had made, a plan which involved getting Dion's body into the bag. As the minutes ticked by, he continued to struggle with the body, the bag, and his own equipment, his breathing becoming harsher and shorter by the moment. Just minutes after reaching the bottom of Bushman's hole, David Shaw passed away. The exertion of breathing so heavily at such great depth caused severe respiratory issues, which led to his death. The divers supporting David in his rescue attempt quickly realized something was wrong. One diver, a friend of David's named Don Shirley, attempted to reach David, but an equipment malfunction prevented him from doing so. Instead, all he was able to do was convey the news of David's death to the other divers, so that it could be relayed to the surface. He did this by writing a message on a slate used by divers to communicate when underwater. The message read, "Dave not coming back." The divers retreated from Bushman's hole. As a further consequence of his equipment malfunction, Don Shirley suffered some decompression-related injuries in the process, but survived. He would suffer from issues with his balance and coordination for many months thereafter, but would ultimately dive again. A few days later, the equipment and lines were removed from Bushman's hole, and it was found that both Dion's body and David's body had floated to the surface and become entangled with a line, meaning that they could be retrieved. Sometime later, David's ashes were scattered in South Africa, a country he had grown to love during his life. Dion, many years after his untimely death, was also finally laid to rest. David Shaw had ultimately succeeded in his mission to retrieve DeAndrea's remains. Though, in the end, it was a mission that cost him his life.